You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
President Trump offers his first, well, actually, it's not a State of the Union speech, but it's a joint session of Congress speech. We will be having the Democratic response, which will be coming up in, I think, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. It'll be given by Michigan Democratic Junior Senator Alyssa Slotkin. And we don't know how long it's going to be, but typically the rebuttal is given by someone the party thinks is an up-and-comer or could be just the future of the party. And they offer this as a national stage for some of the young talent in the party. That's irrespective of it being a Democrat or Republican. But let me just give you a few thoughts of what I thought about President Trump's very long address. We're talking about an hour and 40 to 45 minutes, somewhere in there. Yes, there were disruptions. I'll get to that. But remember how the U.S., or at least I would laugh, and you probably laughed at British Parliament or the South Korean government. You know those scenes where they were fighting at each other, they were hissing at each other, jeering at each other. Remember that? We laughed at their incivility, their behavior. We said, "Oh my gosh, America could never be like that. We would never stoop so low." Well, we stooped that low tonight. We most definitely did. I never saw anything like that. There was the speech itself, which definitely was a pep rally, a campaign rally speech. I wouldn't consider calling it like a joint session of Congress traditional speech. It wasn't meant to unify. I think we can be fair and say that it wasn't meant to unify. It was settling scores, and he was pointing fingers and parsing blame throughout, and also celebrating what he saw to be his successes. That's very unusual for a joint session of Congress. But it's 2025. I think we're in a different space when it comes to speeches, what we expect of a president, what we accept from a president and his behavior. But if you did not catch the beginning of it, and this is something that will be covered extensively on cable news, on mainstream news, the broadcast news, you'll see it again and again. There was a moment near the beginning in which Democratic Congressman Al Green from Houston stood up, and he was pointing his cane at the president and taking issue with some of what the president was saying. And I couldn't hear audibly what he was saying.
I think he was saying that Trump didn't have a mandate to cut Medicaid.
That's right.
That's what I just read.
That's right. Okay. And Trump was saying because in the beginning, President Trump was talking about how he won 7 swing states, how he won the popular vote. And at that point, somewhere in that time, we could see, because they were moving back and forth. The camera was moving back and forth between President Trump and Congressman Al Green, who stood up and pointed his cane at the president and interrupted him a number of times. We had Speaker Mike Johnson use the gavel, something I had never seen before, in the middle of a joint session of Congress speech. First warning that there would be order and decorum in the in the chamber. And then again, he warned that if it should continue, I'm paraphrasing, he didn't use these exact words. He was saying that if there was going to be any other interruptions, that person or persons would be removed from the chamber. And then eventually Speaker Johnson called for the Sergeant of Arms, and it was without incident. It wasn't anything beyond that. Sergeant of Arms escorted Congressman Green out of the chamber, and then for the rest of the speech, it went on pretty much without significant interruption. You did hear jeering, as I was talking about. You did hear exclamations of lies or that's false. What you could see, and if you could not see the address tonight, the Democrats obviously were not there to give the president any type of support. They did hold up these fans, if you will, like if you were in church, these fans, hand fans, they had messages on them. One of them said Musk steals, as in Elon Musk, and another sign said save Medicaid. Others said false. That was a part of the silent resistance or silent form of the protest that they were offering on this evening. I don't know whether it made any real difference in the delivery of the speech by President Trump, but it seemed to me, and this is just me going out there on my own. It seemed to me there wasn't a unified or an agreement of understanding between Democrats whether they would be quiet in their opposition or whether they were going to make some sort of audible response and be disruptive. Because if this is just me looking at the faces of the different members of Congress, it seemed that some members of Democratic members of Congress were content with not making any type of audible scene and just holding up the signs. And there were others who wanted to be heard by alleging that the president was lying or saying that's false, that's untrue, yelling at some points to be audibly heard. I don't think it changed anything, but it did, though, highlight how this particular address was probably the most contentious one that I've ever seen for a joint session of Congress. Yes, we know that Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and Congresswoman Lauren Boebert were very disrespectful and disruptive to President Biden in previous, I'll say, State of the Union addresses, but this was something different. There was a contentiousness from both President Trump and some Democrats that I had never seen in all my years of just following politics. But I will say that this is probably who we are now, and I think who we're going to be for the foreseeable future. If you were expecting President Trump to offer an address that was conciliatory in nature, or it was going to be one of an open hand and possibly one offering a hand of unity, it was not that. And it was clear it was never going to be that. And going forward, it probably is not ever going to be that. For those who think that this was a time for the country to possibly come together, let's not have any illusions. President Trump was making it very clear, at least in his mind, that he has the support of the country. The country has chosen him, and so everything that he chooses is going to be for the good of the country, and he need not have to work across the aisle on anything. At least in the short term, at least until the midterms, mathematically, that is pretty much true. There will not be any real opposition, if only because the Republicans control the House, the Republicans control the Senate, the Republicans obviously control the Oval Office. And in terms of the courts, the Republicans most likely have the most federal judges and obviously a 6-3 justice advantage in a Supreme Court justice sense. So the Democrats, there's really not much that they can do right now. If you happen to be a Democrat or support the Democrats, this is something that is beyond their reach at this point. They can try to be the loyal opposition. They can try to obstruct as best they can. They can try to filibuster, but it's probably not going to stop the Trump legislative agenda. And that's something that President Trump took a lot of time. He almost went executive action by executive action, explaining everything that he had done in the first 40 days or so of his administration. And he prominently featured the culture wars, which again said that he was not trying to bridge any type of gaps between Republicans and Democrats. This culture war is going to continue, and President Trump was definitely speaking to MAGA. And I don't expect the response to be 1/5 as long as President Trump, who was speaking. I expect it to be about maybe 15 minutes tops. I'd be surprised if it's more than that. But again, it's usually the opposition, or the response from the opposition is usually someone who's considered to be a rising star within the party, and they're offering the opportunity for that person to be heard and seen on the national stage. You usually see the young talent coming into prominence in nights just like these. But let me get back to some of the things that President Trump was talking about during his, I don't know the official amount, but it was an hour and 40 minutes thereabouts. I think he started speaking around 6:20-ish. And he finished right around 8 o'clock. But President Trump offered a long list of Doge cuts that he listed as scams, and that's going to be highly contested because he listed these organizations and these things that Congress had already legally apportioned, and that doesn't make it a scam. That just means it's something that's not going to be popular with Republicans or MAGA. That doesn't make it somehow waste or fraud. But you'll hear more about that tomorrow. And in my final thoughts, I'll give you my thoughts about the generalities of a speech like this and how do you know whether it landed or whether it missed the mark. And it has nothing to do with what I think about a speech. It has nothing to do with you may like or even dislike the president. There are other indicators that you and I will be able to see tomorrow, which will be clear, inarguable, and I will say representative of how most industries and most indices receive the speech. And then you get a good sense of where the country will be headed for the next couple of weeks. Again, we're giving some analysis for President Trump and his joint session of Congress speech. It was his first major speech since he's been reelected as president. In just a few moments, we'll probably hear from the Democratic response to the opposition speech, and that's going to be given by Michigan Democratic junior senator Alyssa Slotkin. And it's always weird to hear rebuttal. Most of it is written. This is what I do know. Most of it is written in advance. There's like a boilerplate. You know that the president is going to touch upon A, B, and C. You know the president was going to touch upon tariffs. You know that he was going to touch upon Ukraine. You know that he was going to touch upon illegal immigration, for example. And you kind of write your speech around those tent poles. Then you actually listen to the speech, and then you try to fill in the rest.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
Michigan Democratic junior senator Alyssa Slotkin delivered the rebuttal to the joint session of Congress speech by President Trump tonight. And I don't know if you happen to be a Democrat or if you happen to be a supporter of the Democrats, or maybe you're just not a supporter of President Trump. I don't know how tonight went for you, but I will give you this assessment of the Democratic response and also the Democratic resistance to President Trump in that chamber tonight. I thought it was really lackluster. I mean, I saw members of Congress wearing pink outfits as a form of protest. I saw the signs with things written on them like Musk steals or Save Medicaid or things of that nature, but I didn't see anything that was tantamount to a uniform response, an effective response, or a demonstrative action, which would say that the Democrats have a hold on this moment and understand how they're going to move against the Republican Party and with it President Trump. I just didn't see it. Now, conversely, I'm not going to say that President Trump gave a speech of all speeches. It's much of what we heard. It was mostly a campaign speech. It didn't seem like he was president more than he was running for president, as he was relitigating past grievances and also talking about the election. It seemed kind of strange to me that you would start off a joint session of Congress speech talking about how you won the election or winning the popular vote. That's just really unusual and not usually what is meant for a joint session of Congress. I would always hope that if you are president, that you're going to comport yourself as president and not just be campaigning to be the president of one party as opposed to two. That is just my personal expectation for a speech like this. Now, as far as how it's going to land, you can turn on any cable news station right now, and they have different people offering analysis. They have different political figures and elected officials giving their spin on this message. And you know what? No one will really remember it in 2-3 weeks, with the exception of YouTube clips. No one will remember. No one will really care. What will happen, though, is you'll notice tomorrow how people will react to their feelings surrounding the speech. They'll react to what they think is either the right or the wrong direction of this country. And you'll see it in the markets and you'll see it other places. And I'll talk about this in my final thought. And that, to me, says far more than anything that was actually said in the speech. And something that was told to me a long time ago, and I swear by it even today. I can't tell you what Joe Biden said in his State of the Union speech any of the 4 years that he gave them. I can't tell you anything substantively that was said in any State of the Union or joint session of Congress speech by President Trump. I have no memory of them, and I doubt you do either. But you always remember how you may have felt after they were done speaking. You may have felt either more confident or less confident in the commander-in-chief for whatever reasons. And that's usually the barometer, the thermometer, however you want to measure it, as far as whether the speech was successful as far as reaching the American people. Did you have some sort of emotional response, either positive or negative? You're not going to remember the words of the speech. And I doubt if I were to quiz anyone, you'd be able to tell me much of anything. You might be able to come up with one line, maybe, but that's about it. It is more a function of, did you leave the speech feeling more confident or less confident about the direction of this country? It's been said more times than 1,000 that we are more separated, that we are more partisan, that we're more divided than ever before. Tonight is not going to change that. In fact, I think it's fair to say that the speech by President Trump played on that and also played to that to make sure that we were more divided. If you like President Trump, you're going to like what he had to say tonight. Just that simple. It was vintage Donald Trump. If anything, he was unrestrained and unconstrained, where he said absolutely everything he wanted to say. And if you supported him, then of course you're going to love that. And if you weren't a supporter of him, then you're not going to like anything he has to say. So we're going to be just as bitterly divided tomorrow as we are today. The question is, how is the stock market going to respond? How are our allies going to respond? We heard what he had to say during the speech about tariffs. And he said something about reciprocal tariffs, which were going to be set for April 2nd. In other words, any tariff that we have to pay regarding another country's goods, we're either going to meet that or implement a new tariff. There's going to be a lot of economic uncertainty for the foreseeable future. And how that's going to sit with not only Americans, but our allies and our markets, is yet to be seen. And although there are those who may love the speech, it doesn't mean that there won't be consequences for the speech. And if you hated the speech, it doesn't mean that somehow Donald Trump's legislative agenda is going to be slowed down. There are a lot of factors and a lot of variables as to what this country is going to go through. And we're going to go through some stuff for the next few years. Because Donald Trump, if anything, he's been consistent as a disruptor and also making people uncomfortable. And that plays out in a lot of ways. It may not be good for your 401k. It may not be good for unemployment. It may be good for you. There are a lot of people who voted. You might have been seeing the news. A lot of people who voted for Donald Trump who are maybe having some second thoughts if they happen to be some of the people who were laid off by Doge. Those are some of the unintended consequences that we're all going to have to experience. I happen to know that the stock market dropped 1,300 points in the next 2 days. If it gets it all back in the next week, no harm, no foul. But if it starts to turn into a trend, then we may see some economic damage, which will be not so easy to recover from. So how we feel about this speech on this given evening, it really doesn't matter. Whether you happen to have loved the speech, you thought it was his greatest speech, or you thought it was more of the same and you can't stand the man, it really doesn't matter. What happens tomorrow, what happens with Canada, what happens with Ukraine, you might have even seen what Kim Jong-un's sister had to say about America today. What happens with our allies as well as our adversaries will say far more than anything that was said in that chamber tonight.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
It's Later with Mo Kelly. We're live everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. We're covering the joint session of Congress remarks from both President Trump and also the Democratic response by the junior senator from Michigan, her name Elissa Slotkin. And I'm actually surprised how long President Trump spoke. He got to the podium, I want to say 15 minutes late. He started about 20 minutes after 6, and he finished up close to 8 p.m. There was some disturbances at the beginning. There were long applause breaks. There was some booing, some hissing, which obviously lengthened the totality of the address itself. You know, if you take out all the applause lines, you probably wouldn't have been done in 20, 25 minutes. But these things usually run long. Then we had the response from Alyssa Slotkin. Overall, and I'll talk about this next segment, it's not going down as his best in history. That is President Trump's. I don't know how consequential it will be. Tomorrow we'll know, because we'll see the response from adversaries and allies alike. We'll see the response from the stock market. I don't think the Democrats were particularly effective at providing any type of real resistance. Not that they could do much. I thought it would at least have been a little bit more coordinated. Yeah, the Democrats and at least the female Congress members in pink. Okay. You had the handheld signs they were like, it's almost like half of the Democrats said, hey, we're going to be quiet and silently protest. We're going to hold up these signs saying Musk steals or save Medicaid. Others said false. And there were some Democrats who said, no, we're going to set this motherfucker off. And you had Democratic Congressman from Texas, Al Green, standing up and pointing his cane at President Trump, disrupting the proceedings. You had Mike Johnson get on the gavel twice, threatening to have Al Green removed from the chamber if he kept on. He kept on. He was escorted out by the sergeant at arms. I would say that was the quote unquote highlight of the evening. That's the piece that you could have replayed from here until, I don't know, the next 4 weeks probably. But I don't think the Democrats were they weren't effective in their resistance. I don't know really where the minority House Leader Hakeem Jeffries was. Yeah, I saw him, but I'm saying I don't know where he was in the coordination of all this. It didn't seem like it landed particularly effectively, but maybe I'm wrong. As far as President Trump, he went through everything. He had scores to settle. He had insults to make. He had barbs to throw at former President Biden. He had all things to say about the time that he avoided the assassination attempt. He was relitigating 2020 all over again. He was relitigating 2024. He laid out all of his executive actions from number 1 to number 81. I don't know how many that he's done. And he's talked about his vision for the next 4 years. It was not a come together moment. Be clear. He was not trying to unify or bring the country together. And I think that's fair to say. He was up there saying, I'm the man. This is my administration. This is what I plan to do. This is what I've done. Either get on board or get out of the way. Right now, he can say that because legislatively, there is nobody to stop him. There is nothing to stop him legally, legislatively, I don't know, socially. The ineptitude of the Democrats, there's nothing to stop him. So he's going to basically do whatever he wants. And he's going to try to find that line as far as how far he can go, at least in the next 6-7 months. The only time that any of this is going to change is when you may see some lawsuits from people who were fired because of DOJ and the firing of federal employees without cause. You may see some lawsuits which may push back against the Trump administration, but you're not going to see anything substantively until the midterms.
Can I just say, sure. I'm seeing a bunch of fact checks now starting to come out on all the major news sites. And without getting too far into the weeds, I will say they're extensive.
Well, you have to know that we live in a time now where facts do not matter. When I say that is people are not going to be swayed by facts. People are not impressed by facts. People, by and large, do not care about facts. It's more about how we feel. And the address tonight was about making people feel a certain way. If you're a supporter of President Trump, you felt great. If you didn't support President Trump, you did not like the speech. Facts had nothing to do with any of that. I could fact check them and say all the things which were categorically untrue and verifiably and provably untrue. Doesn't really matter. Doesn't matter. And when he was listing all the supposed fraud that he found without evidence, I mean, I could easily say that was all congressionally apportioned. That's not waste. That's not fraud. That's a part of the previous budget, which had been approved. That's how the system is supposed to work. And then President Trump can offer, with the help of the Republican conference, can offer their budget and spend money however they want, provided that budget is approved. And that has to do with people not understanding the meanings of words.
It's all about vibes, man.
Calling something fraud doesn't make it fraud. Calling something waste doesn't make it waste. And if you don't know how any of this works, then everything seems like a fraud, seems like a scam, seems like a conspiracy, because you don't know how our country actually works.
Well, everything you don't like is fraud. I thought you knew that.
Yeah, I know. And unfortunately, I'm burdened by civics. And understanding how the process works doesn't mean that something has been misappropriated or misapportioned or misused or fraudulently spent. It just means that it's going to be a line item which is going to be cut if you actually go through the correct process of amending a budget or submitting a budget. If you don't want to spend $10,000 for housing for illegal immigrants, okay, you cut it from the budget. It ain't that hard. But when you call it fraud, you're painting then a picture that something's been stolen or something illegal happened, because fraud is illegal, that you are doing something untoward. That's not necessarily the case, but that's why we have inspectors general. Oh, no, we don't. They were all fired. It's Later with Mo Kelly. KFI AM 640. We're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
Tomorrow you will be able to catch me if you should get up early enough. I'll be on Spectrum News with Kelvin Washington at both 6:30 and 7:30. They're going to keep me for more than an hour. I'm going to do 2 hits during that time, talking about the speech to the joint session of Congress. And probably what I think about it tomorrow will be a little bit different. Well, I should say I'll have more information tomorrow as opposed to tonight. And what I mean by that is sometimes we get too caught up in the speech, how it makes us feel, and overlook the fact that there is going to be a reaction, which is different from a rebuttal. Rebuttal is just what we want to say. A reaction is how markets and countries will respond, because those speeches set a tone. And this is something I wanted to end on tonight as part of my final thought. Everything a president does, everything, be it by word or deed, does one of two things. It either increases confidence or it increases concern. It's hard to argue that anything a president does is inherently neutral. It's not like a president can do something and not have a ripple effect elsewhere. Granted, not everything a president does is massively important, but I would argue, and I am arguing tonight, that nothing a president does is wholly unimportant. Even the little things matter. One of the easiest ways to gauge confidence or concern, just look at the stock market. The president says something or signs an executive action or makes a post on social media, and what happens? The markets react, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. Over the past 2 days, the Dow has dropped more than 1,300 points. That says a hell of a lot. What the market does tomorrow, after tonight's joint session, will say plenty as well. And it won't be about whether they thought they liked the speech, or whether they thought that the speech was funny, or whether they were mad at some of the insults to the speech. It won't have anything to do with that. If it instilled confidence, the markets will likely rebound from that 1,300 point drop in the past 2 days. It'll likely rebound in a big way. If it freaked out investors more than they're already freaked out, the drop will continue. That's what I'm looking for. And that has nothing to do with my analysis. I'm looking at how markets, how countries will respond. Why? Because everything a president does, be it by word or deed, either increases confidence or increases concern. And this is an extremely precarious moment for our nation. We are now in trade wars with not one, but 3 different countries. And 2 of them, in theory, are our allies, or maybe they used to be our allies. Our economy was already fragile due to inflation. You heard President Trump talk about that. Inflation is still a real thing. You know what else is real? Bird flu. That's also real. That's affecting our groceries. That's affecting our supply chains and other factors. And I made mention of it earlier, but I want to reiterate the sister of North Korea's Kim Jong-un. I don't know what her title is, but she's influential. She threatened the U.S. given the arrival of a U.S. aircraft carrier in South Korea on Sunday. That's going to impact the markets. There's the uncertainty of the Israel-Gaza ceasefire. There's the uncertainty of Ukraine and Russia, the war, whether there'll be a mineral deal, whether there'll be an actual ceasefire, whether there'll actually be peace, what concessions are going to be made. And we've already said that we're going to pause our aid to Ukraine, which means probably end it altogether. That is going to send a message, and different countries are going to respond in their own way, and our markets are going to respond. And it doesn't really matter whether you like the speech. It doesn't really matter whether you hated the speech, because everything a president does, be it by word or deed, either increases confidence or increases concern. And you don't have to take my word for it. I know what some of you think, like, Mo, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And you know what? I may not. That's why tomorrow I'm going to watch and see the response, because that says more and carries far more weight than anything I have to say. You don't have to take the word of anyone in the spin room on cable news, and they are spinning. They're going to try to tell you everything they want you to believe, not actually what you actually saw. The president did one of two things: either helped allay the fears surrounding these issues that I just told you about, or he made everything all the worse. And you'll see it in the stock market. And stock markets usually react negatively to uncertainty or negative economic news, like tariffs. You'll see it in our grocery store prices. You'll see it in our future trade agreements. You'll see it in our gas prices. The speech tonight may or may not be memorable. In fact, I can't remember half of it. The guy spoke for like an hour and 40 minutes. I remember a line here or there. You may remember 2 lines, but likely none of us will remember of what was said in the coming months. But this is what we will remember. Tonight's joint speech was not an olive branch. It was not a picture of a unified America. It was basically a campaign speech for a job he already had, relitigating the last election, assessing blame for anything negative and claiming credit for everything else, both real and imaginary. And there's going to be a response to all of that. And whether you like the speech, you may not like the response. So I'm just saying, slow down. The impact of the speech tonight, I would say more so than other speeches, will be felt. It'll be real and really remarkable. It starts tomorrow, because the response is not just here. Canada will have a response. Mexico will have a response. Europe will have a response. Ukraine will have a response. And then from that, the markets and the world will give us a better sense of the impact of that speech. Because to me, that is far more important than ratings, viewership, or dare I say, owning the libs. Or at least it used to be. For KFI AM 640, I'm Mo Kelly.
We tried less stimulating talk. It ended poorly. KFI.
And KOST HD2.
Los Angeles, Orange County.
Live every